know me, my name is Andrew. Hi. I'll be talking about Web Accessibility 101. So the reason I wanted to give this talk, and I wanted to ask y'all too, so how many of y'all heard about accessibility at all as a concept? Because I never did, at all. Okay, so I never heard about it as a concept at all until a few months ago. I was actually 3 or 4 months into my current job. So my current job, we make internal applications for AT&T. So nothing is external client facing. So web accessibility is not something they take into consideration. So yeah, I was 3 or 4 months in, and somebody mentioned something about screen readers or anything remotely about accessibility, and I was like, what is this? Why have I never heard of this concept ever? So I started researching it, and I was like, if I haven't heard about it, I'm pretty sure people who went to the Iron Yard or in my shoes haven't heard about it either. So this talk is totally geared at nothing, and hopefully in a half hour you'll have a basic idea of what accessibility is on the web and why it's important, and some basic things you can do to keep that in mind. Cool. So yeah, we'll talk about what is accessibility. How do people use the web? Because that's kind of the most interesting part of this, right? The reason we need accessibility is because not everyone uses the web the same way, right? If you're blind or have low vision, or you're deaf or hard of hearing, or you have any kind of motor function or dexterity deficiency, you're not going to use the web the same way. If you have short-term memory loss, or if you have some kind of dementia, that's going to affect the way you navigate sites and the way you can process that information. It's really interesting. So also, why do we care? Why is this important at all, really? Some easy ways to make things better, and I'll give you some resources as well to move on from. Okay, so web accessibility, I've hinted at kind of a lot, but it's just removing barriers for people who access the web in different ways than probably most of us in the room do, right? It's people who, like I said, are blind or have low vision and can't see information, people who can't hear information, people who can't use a mouse or use a keyboard the same way we do, or people who just don't have the cognitive abilities for whatever reason to navigate sites the same way. We want to remove those barriers so we can share information, right? It's kind of important. So how do people use the web, right? If you're blind or have low vision, you might use a screen reader, which is a really, really cool concept. And basically, a screen reader reads a screen out to you, right? So it's just going to crawl through your page's HTML, and it's going to read out the HTML to you in a way that, if you're used to using a screen reader, you can kind of get an idea of what the site is trying to show you images, but you're hearing, right? So obviously, with screen readers, it makes a really big difference how well your HTML is formatted and tagged, because if it's not tagged appropriately, that screen reader is going to get really confused when it's trying to read it out to you because you're not using conventional good HTML style. And we'll go into that a bit more later.
So literally what the tags are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so think about it, right? So the screen reader is designed and written to process HTML as it's appropriately tagged, right? Because it has to have something to go off of. And if you don't give it anything to go off of, it's going to get confused, right? So usually when people talk about making websites accessible, that's usually what they're talking about. That's one of the biggest things you hear about, right? It's making a site accessible for screen readers, right? Properly tagging HTML, kind of a whole array. But we'll go into it later, but that's the general idea. So people who are deaf or hard of hearing, closed caption is obviously really, really important. If you're trying to convey information via sound and people can't process sound, they're going to need some kind of other method to get that same information. Yeah, so if you have a video, have closed caption, people can't hear your sound, they're not going to get anything out of that. So people who have limited dexterity, maybe they have arthritis or muscular dystrophy or any kind of mobility issue, maybe they can't use a mouse. It's pretty common. It requires kind of a lot of dexterity to use a mouse. They might only use a keyboard to interact with the web. So the ability to tab through links, for example, or tab through anchors on a page is really important for them, right? If they can't click on a link with a mouse, they need to be able to tab to it so they can press enter and go to that link. But websites aren't always designed with that in mind. So they kind of get screwed over in that regard sometimes. And something else that's not on here, but it's really important, is people with any kind of cognitive disability, people who have dementia or short-term memory loss, or even people who are just new users to your site and don't know how to access things or are new to technology. This is not uncommon, right? If you have a really confusing site layout that you think is like really trendy and futuristic, it's just hard to navigate, it's going to be difficult for lots of people, right? So yeah, we'll go into that as well. But
and the mindbirds of the world who just use the keyboard only.
Right, totally. Or if you have like Vimium set up, you know, totally. Okay, so why do we care? So this is a cool quote. It's pretty generic in what it's saying. Like, power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. So this is a cool quote. It's pretty standard, but I think what's important is who said it. Tim Berners-Lee, W3C director and inventor of the World Wide Web. So like literally the guy who created the World Wide Web says it should be accessible. And I think if nothing else, it's a really strong sell for me. If you haven't read about Tim Berners-Lee, he's a really, really cool dude. He invented not the internet, the World Wide Web. They're a little bit different, but he created the www. And he's also a really big proponent of keeping the internet free and accessible again, and also keeping it neutral. So he's a really big proponent of net neutrality, which I think makes sense. But yeah, so literally the guy who made the World Wide Web says we should share it. It's a strong vote. Okay, so there's also kind of this myth when you're designing for accessibility that you're not actually impacting a lot of people. Are like, oh, well, it's only people who are totally blind or people who have really, really severe disabilities that need this. And that's not really true, right? So one, there are a lot more people who have disabilities than we tend to think about. So it's kind of hard to get numbers of people who use like assistive technologies or who benefit from web accessibility, but there are really good numbers on people who have disabilities. And that's a good ballpark to go off of to get an idea of people who are benefiting from accessibility, right? So just in the US, we have about 7% of the population ages 15 and over who have a sight or hearing disability. And that's not even counting the ones who have motor difficulties or cognitive impairments, right? This is just sight and hearing. And then once you get to people over the age of 65, it's over 20%, which makes sense, right? You get older and you don't hear as well, you don't see as well. A lot of other diseases or conditions might pop up, like as you age. It's really, really common. And actually, designing for the elderly is a really, really interesting aspect of web accessibility. Because as our whole world population ages, we're having more people who are over the age of 65 who have been using the web their entire lives or the vast majority of it, right? So you think about it, and you think about your great-grandma right now who's 85 years old and doesn't even use a computer, and you're like, who cares? Like, she doesn't use the internet, like, no one 85 does, right? It's kind of a myth as well, but that's what we think of, right? But that's not going to be true in 10 and 15 years, and it's not true now. But the baby boomers are getting older, and they're having these issues, and they use the internet. Like, they're online right now, and we need to make considerations for them as they age and as they just need some assistance sometimes. They need more accessible content. All right, so I found some really good links. All right, there we go. These just didn't really transfer well to PowerPoint. They can make a little better on the website. This is just incidence of disability by age, and I hope you all can see that. This is ages 65 to 74. So you really see after 65, like, this starts to go up, which makes sense. People are aging, right? This purple line is hearing difficulty. It's people who need closed caption. Once you get over 65, this is climbing well over 10%, right? And that's for all of these things. You have cognitive difficulty, this is the blue line, and difficulty seeing newsprint. So if you can't read newsprint, you probably are going to need some kind of, you have low vision, right? So I also have this other link. This is actually an infographic from Australia, which I thought was interesting. So this infographic It's just trying to give an idea of the percentage of populations in first world countries that have disabilities and benefit from accessibility in web design, right? So it says here 1 in 5 Australians has a disability, right? So this is all across the board. This is not just hearing and sight, but it gives you an idea. Like these are big numbers. These are big numbers, and it's a lot of people. If 500,000 Australians are visually impaired, 2.1 million are completely or partially deaf. This is just Australia. Like, this is a lot. And it's mind-blowing. Like, I did not know about these numbers. But yeah, that's all I really want to show you at this one. All right. So I wanted to talk about screen readers a little bit because, once again, it's one of the biggest things people talk about when they talk about accessibility in web design, right? So I'm going to show you some examples of videos of screen readers being used. I think that's really the best way to understand them, to see them used as a blind person or a person with low vision would use them, right? But yeah, all they're going to do is just read the site's HTML to the user. So if a user is used to using a screen reader, they can get an idea of the site's content. Okay. And so I'm going to show you some good examples of sites that are optimized for screen readers and some less than ideal examples. And we'll start with a good example. So this is an example of a site that's been optimized for screen readers. Obviously, where's it from? It's from, yeah, you'll see.
This page with graphic accessibility rules brand. This page with graphic photo and exploring the natural drawing of possible listeners of LG Business 1907. Graphic nature programs and facilities accessible. Graphic for educators and museums. This page with graphic disability awareness training. This page with graphic photo and site ABS. Graphic teaching staff about disability and inclusion. This page with graphic resources. This page with graphic photo and on the computer. Graphic employment with museums and in the arts. And organic for safety to improve the process of creating accessible programming for people with visual impairment. Graphic photo and integrated descriptions of later Casper John's Princeton Company by a young woman with a vehicle not hard in New York.
Cool. So you get the idea. This is a little hard to follow if you don't normally use a screen reader, but you could definitely make this work. Like, totally, like you get an idea. There's a lot of graphics. You can see where the links are. You could navigate this site pretty effectively if you were blind or couldn't see well. All right, so we're going to go to one that's not as awesome, unfortunately.
I was going to say that you probably have like an algorithm or something that smooths out the graphic does this, the graphic does that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, different screen readers will be better than others. Yeah. But in general, like this one is telling you what's there. All right, so the first part of this, we'll skip through. So in a second, they're going to start going through it with an actual screen reader. Right. Right. Isn't it like kind of sad? But they're all links. That's the thing, right?
Every color on it.
It's a link. Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. There's just nothing.
I love the Portuguese.
Yeah, it's very confused. I think the YouTube closed caption is just automatic, which is it's great, but it definitely gets confused sometimes for sure. All right, so we're gonna do one more less than great example, which is actually from the New York Times. to show that like sometimes like actually like big websites have really inaccessible sites.
Oh, so every single little element.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was saying about trying to find out, which are those truly important parts of the web page.
Mm-hmm.
Almost blank.
Yeah.
Voice control.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like this very much.
It's kind of
Right.
the deadline page went moving from element to element.
All right. So you get the idea, though. Like these sites, like if you can't see them, like you're not going to get anything out of that, and that's really a shame. Like you're missing a really big audience in that way. Yeah. Poor design. Poor. All right. So another really interesting thing, and I hope you can hear it, is I never understood why we had language tags in HTML for the longest time. I was like, it's English, like I can read English, like if you can't read it, like it's not English, who cares? Like HTML, it's fine, right? I didn't know they're for screen readers because they have to know the language to be able to enunciate things properly. If he doesn't know the language, he doesn't know how to stress certain words, right? So I found a video of it comparing HTML that has a language tag and one that doesn't. So if we try to listen very, very carefully. It's crazy, right? Let's hear it again. Right, so all you're doing is adding that language tag, but you're making it so much more accessible to your user. Like, that is a tiny, tiny addition that will make a huge difference. And that blew my mind. This is crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. It's saying, like, this is French, so read it like it's French. But if it doesn't know, it's going to read it like it's English or whatever the default setting is, and it's not going to make any sense.
Wait, is
Right?
there French HTML? Like,
No, so...
I had a GPS machine where the maps was then. That I had similar accents like that, and we had a good laugh when we switched to the Australian accent.
Right. But yeah.
You can actually hard code that into the website.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably just the like the default for your screen reader is what I assume. But obviously, if you ever change languages, which people do all the time, like it's not going to recognize that unless your page is properly tagged. Yeah, it makes such a big, crazy difference. Okay, so there are tons and tons of ways to optimize your HTML for screen readers, and we'll go through a little checklist of those later. And there's a huge, huge reference list available through W3C, which I'll also give to you as a resource. But yeah, as a general rule, properly tagged HTML, like this is a link, and this is an image, and this is the alternative text for an image, and this is the language that we have this in. All of that is going to make a screen reader understand what your site is trying to do, so it's going to be able to function properly. That's the general gist, right? So people who have auditory needs, right? People who are deaf or hard of hearing, if your video doesn't have closed caption, they're not going to get anything out of it, right? Which makes sense. So videos or sounds that don't have volume control as well, but just like always like one default volume, or it's always really quiet. People who are hard of hearing, they're not going to get anything out of that. You should be able to crank that volume up if you don't hear well, right? And something that I really hadn't thought about until I started researching for this talk is like when you can't manipulate closed caption text, right? So it's really common to be hard of hearing and need closed caption, but also have low vision. So if you can't adjust the contrast or adjust the size of the text, then, and it's usually contrast is what I was reading about, right? If you have like white text on a really light video, like no one can read it, right? So can you like make that text black or like make it white with a dark background? There are lots of little things you can do to make these things actually accessible. Like if you're going to go to the trouble of like making it, like go the extra step to like make it have better contrast or make it bigger. I never thought about that, right? Like imagine like even the YouTube videos. I don't think you can change the text color. So if you have like black text on like a black video, like it's like a low light video, you're not going to get that. Or actually, I think the caption is like white on a black background for that, isn't it? It is. They've done well. They've done very well. Okay, let's skip ahead. So, if you can tell, I like links. I'm like a super visual person. I want to get out of this. Exit the show. All right. Yeah, so I'm a super visual person, and I really feel like to understand how people interact with the web, you kind of have to see it. You have to like watch a video. You have to interact with it a little bit more closely to like understand how they're using this, right? HTML link targets. Oh yes, I was going to show you closed caption on YouTube before we had to use it. So it's so great that YouTube has closed caption options, but we already got to use them. So thank you, YouTube. This video is now defunct. But yeah, isn't it fantastic to have the option of closed caption? Yeah, it's actually kind of funny because my mom is hard of hearing. So I grew up like always having closed caption on the TV, like all the time. So like even now, like I usually have closed caption on the TV because I grew up with it and that's what you're used to. So when I was little, I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I went to a friend's house, and I was like, I think your TV is broken. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I was like, where are your words at? And they were so confused, and I was so confused. It's just something you never think about people are used to and people like to have. Like, usually if closed caption is an option, I pretty much always take it. But like, I'm not deaf and I'm not hard of hearing, but making that key part of your site accessible to those people like also benefits me, and I love it. So you're really benefiting a lot of people besides people who strictly have to have this, which I think is really interesting. So people who have motor difficulties, people who might have arthritis or like muscular dystrophy, or generally just don't have a lot of dexterity. Even people who use who like don't have functions or can't control like their hands and arms, won't have to use a keyboard. They can use one of those like mouth sticks. Have you seen that? It's crazy. It's super cool, right? So they can just use this. I feel so terrible. I don't know the word for it, right? People who have like really severe paralysis, they can use the mouth stick to use their keyboard and interact with the web that way, and it's just really cool. Maybe I can find a picture and show you. But regardless, so in most cases they won't use a mouse. That's the most common alteration you'll see. But sometimes they have such severe disabilities they might not use a keyboard at all, and they'll use like a speech recognition software. So they'll say, go to this, and the software goes to that. It's really cool. I've actually heard of developers who like program entirely through speech recognition software, which is really cool. Yeah. Yeah, I heard about this one guy who I think he was in a really bad car accident, and he like was paralyzed from like the neck down or something. And he programmed in all these Vim commands to this like speech recognition software. He just talks at the computer and it just like codes it all up for him. It's really crazy, really cool. So yeah, so some considerations when people have dexterity issues is a lot of times what's really hard is like small target areas. Like, you know how sometimes you'll have a link and it's like a title and this little button at the side you have to actually click? Like one, it's just bad design. It's a pain in the butt for people who don't have accessibility needs. People who do, like they actually like have a lot of trouble like clicking that tiny little thing because they don't have the same motor control. So wrapping your inputs in labels so like that whole title is clickable and you have a bigger target area. Like little things like that make a really big difference. So also I mentioned before a little bit, oh my goodness, the ability to tab through links, so to have like a focus attribute, and it'll also act as like an anchor for your page. So you can, I'm going to show you a site that displays this well. So some sites you try and tab and like nothing really happens, right? And I hate that. But this site, I can not use my mouse, and jump to content, jump to navigation, jump to footer. Just really cool. So I can this is the header, and this is the first link, and then the Opera browser. Oh, I'll learn more about that. See footnote. And you'll also notice when they highlight their links, it's really obvious where it's at. People who have low vision, it's really easy to see, right? It sticks out, right? So yeah, so I can jump through this whole site, just the tab key. What is really, really cool about this is this part at the beginning where they have the jump to content, jump to header, jump to footer. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's really, the actual code for that would not be difficult code, right? So it's why not just do it, right? Think about these things, try and make it accessible, and take these really small steps to make your content that much easier and better to use. And also, Michael Bird would love that. Jump to content, yes, let's do that. Just in general, a lot of times, these site design considerations make it more accessible, but they also make it just a much better user experience, right? You're making things that are just easy to use, and they're not complicated, which is just much better UX in general. Those are some basic considerations for that. It's people who have cognitive impairments. I mentioned it a couple times, memory loss is common, dementia, people who are just new users to your site and are going to be really confused by complicated layouts. I've heard non-native English speakers, if you have an English site, it'll be confusing, right? It's another barrier for them. So some things you might want to think about, not having a super, super complicated site navigation. Not having a nav bar is usually really frustrating for users because a nav bar is everybody knows what a nav bar is. It's an easy way to look and go, I need to go here to navigate, right? It's there on most sites, and when it's not there, people don't know what to do, right? So people think nav bars are kind of outdated, but they work, and people know what they are. So it's an interesting thing. It's a good thing to have, right? People recognize what that is, and they know how to interact with it. Something to think about is having flashing images or background sounds that you can't turn off that are really distracting, or background video. I really, really hate, just as a general design thing, I turned off Google Hangout, didn't I? Maybe, probably. So one thing I really, really hate is Airbnb's website, and I'll show you why. Because you do anything to it, and now it's not doing it. Oh, of course. Okay, but this. Okay, well.
We can't read that.
You can't read it?
Yeah.
That's true. So yeah, so one, contrast is a really interesting thing to think about, right? Have high contrast text.
You have problems, trying to read that text. There's a tab on the top.
Totally, totally. And one thing they're talking about is when you have these big images as backgrounds, it's hard to read, right? So what I was going to talk about with Airbnb was they have a video that plays, and it just doesn't stop. It's just there's things in the background moving. I don't know why it's not doing it now. It knows I'm onto it, I'm pretty sure. It starts an actual video, which is cool. Blah, blah, blah. There's also no option for closed caption here, unfortunately. But regardless. And how do I even X out of here? Right. So when I went here before, I promise, this video just keeps playing, right? And there wasn't a good way to turn it off. This is distracting. I just want to go to your site. Leave me alone. So it's hiding now, but it's just another example of things that might be confusing to users and confusing to anybody. So we've gone through how people use the web and how problems they might have, right, with different conditions. So there's a really great set of guidelines from the W3C. It's web content accessibility guidelines. We're not going to go through these. It's really long and it's really, really cool to look at and gives you a lot of interesting ideas. But it's a good resource, and it'll tell you if you have certain HTML, like this is what screen readers are designed around. So when people are designing the software, they're designing it with these in mind, right? Or it'll say like, if you have an image, like have alt text. If you make a link, like make sure it has this. If you do this, make sure it has that. Just take a look at it, right? And see what's up. All right, so we'll go through this basic checklist. It's from Ally Project. And this is just kind of some low-hanging fruit of like making your site accessible. So we're going to skip through these roles as they're part of ARIA, which is really cool to look at, but you know, we've been doing this for a while. So as a checklist, like, you know, have a language attribute. Use semantic headings and structure. Make it a little easier to follow. Ensure links have a focus state. That's so you can tab through them, right? Ensure links are recognizable. Like if you're on a link, you know it when you see it, right? Use appropriate alt text, right? Have unobtrusive JavaScript and have some non-JS alternatives. See, and like this checklist is like a really cool way to like look through some big hitters, right? You're like, am I doing some basic things that'll help people out? So, and just have a logical. This is good UX too, right? Have a logical layout. Associate labels for all form controls. Make sure placeholder attributes you can read. So provide transcripts, have subtitles, color contrast. Color blindness is fascinating. So there are people who like don't see color the same way as we do. So like they might not see blue the same way, or not see green the same way. So they have filters you can put your site through, and it'll show you what it might look like to a person who has these color deficiencies, right? Sometimes your layouts just like don't make sense, right? Like you might have like a green and a red button, but because they don't see this certain color, they both look orange. So I recommend you look at this. It's very cool. But you know, yeah. So testing, test with a screen reader, test using only a keyboard. I like the checklist a lot. One, because you can actually check it. It's very satisfying. And two, because it gives you some like really concrete things to look at and evaluate as you're designing your site. Okay. So Form Linter is also a really cool tool. It'll you put in any URL and it'll evaluate your forms and make sure that they're accessible and that they're usable. Only for forms, not for sites. But it'll give you warnings or errors if your forms aren't great, basically. Yeah, so that one's not as cool. It's cool, but not as cool. So things that I really like, the Ally project is really, really cool. That's where we got that checklist from. Everything on their site is really geared towards like total beginners, and it's just like very easy to understand, right? W3 is also fantastic. They're the people who put out the web guidelines for accessibility. They have a great site, and they're kind of a big deal in general. All right. So resources for testing accessibility. There's a lot of gems you can put in for like Rails projects or just testing scripts you can run, and it'll do some basic accessibility testing like, does your HTML have language tags? Does it have this and this? And it'll give you warnings and errors just off some basic guidelines. And like, why not do that? Why not just run that test suite and see what comes up? So at least you know where you might be doing really good and have some areas where you might want to look at your design, right? I haven't personally used these, but Google highly, highly recommends them. I know there's a couple of other ones too, but I think Thoughtbot was working on one. But anyway, there's a bunch, and they're really easy. You just run the test. Like if you go to merge code, run the test, see what it says. Yeah, so these are great tools, but they're not going to uncover everything, right? They're just automated tests. So it's really, really awesome if you can, kind of like our checklist said, like go through the site using only a keyboard. Like go through a site using only a screen reader. Have someone who has limited mobility, like try to access your site. Like have someone who actually uses a screen reader go through your site. That user testing is always going to give you the best feedback. And just in general, like always have users test your site before you deploy it, right? If they're going to uncover like all kinds of crazy things, like have your drunk mother go and do it, right? There was an actual website where a guy, you could pay to have a guy have his drunk mother go through your website and test its usability. So the idea was that if his mother can do it, no. Yeah. Anyway. But yeah.
Not a good situation.
But you would get some fascinating feedback. For sure.
Sure, yeah, choose.
Yeah. But
I'd rather get my friends over and get them drunk and then have them pay someone's mom to do it.
But do you though, right? Is the question. Because like who is your target audience? If your target audience is like only your friends, then like yeah, totally. But it's really interesting to see people who are developers or who are very tech savvy go through a site versus like my mom or my grandma, right? Different expectations. And I think it's just like if your target audience is developers, then like maybe you don't need to. But if you have like an e-commerce site, maybe you should, right? It's like people just like do like the craziest things, right? Like users just break things in weird ways. But yeah, so we've gone through everything I wanted to go through. If you have any questions, we could talk about stuff or whatever. But we talked about a lot, so.
That was also it's very relevant to what I've been thinking about because I've been giving this woman like computer lessons for the past few months. She's like, she just wants to learn how to make a table and like Word for her job. It would like make she had retypes this table every day to like check things off on it. So I've just been working with her in Word, and well, first of all, that toolbar is great, but she can't see anything. She can't see like online sources online, and a big thing is clicking and highlighting. Like she just like it doesn't have the reflexes. And
it's the actual dexterity, right?
Understanding you have to like click and then like right click inside where you highlighted, and like I'm not sure like how much time to spend on like getting her,
totally.
Let's do that versus like it's just a tool to like I don't know.
Yeah. It's definitely a challenge though, right? Because it's really hard to like put yourself in someone else's shoes. That's why you never think about it. You're like, oh, I just like highlight it and click on it and like it's fine. But like not everyone can do that or knows how to do that. It's a very interesting.
I think that Microsoft Word is like hit with it.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, that's accessibility.
Did you see that there's some kind of site that does some testing and it's got a logo that's like sunglasses with a rainbow behind it?
I'm gonna try and find it.
I can't remember what it is, but it's really, really good to help try to find it.
And it like runs a site through those checklists basically?
Like, yeah, as you're just going through the site, you know how in bullet, it'll tell you about your N+1 queries at the bottom?
Mm-hmm.
It'll basically just tell you, hey, this is not going to fly.
Right.
So that's really cool. I'll try to find it and post it in the...
Yeah, that's super cool.
But what would you say was like something you're always definitely going to do? Are you going to do 10 things every time? Are you going to always use your checklist? Like, how has all this research changed what you do on a daily basis? Yeah,
so I feel like if you're working in an existing code base that hasn't been designed with accessibility in mind, like unfortunately, you're probably not going to be able to totally revamp it and make it super accessible. Like, at least not overnight. It's not going to happen. But there are like really, really tiny things you can do, like adding a language tag or adding those focus dates to links. And they're super, super small, and you can sneak them into your code base anywhere. It won't take you any more time, and there's no reason not to do those. So I think that was kind of the biggest thing for me, is just realizing how many painless things there are to do that can make even what is still not a very accessible code base a little bit better. Because you can't revamp it overnight. That, and I think color contrast was a really interesting thing I learned about, right? So a lot of times it's like you'll have like a light gray button on a white background, and that's hard to see for anybody. So it's like, don't do that. Like, if you have low vision, you can't see that at all. Or just like have better design, period, right? Yeah, definitely all of the like super, super easy HTML things you can do. Yeah. But cool. All right. Yeah.